Is the new Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives about to have a major impact on aid for Ukraine? Hello, I'm Mike Walter, sitting in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. Just a few days into his new role as Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson wants a standalone bill to provide $14.3 billion to aid to Israel. This afternoon, of course, after President Biden last week requested nearly $106 billion. That would also include aid not just for Israel, but for Ukraine, other regions like the Indo-Pacific, and U.S. border security. How will members of Congress from both major political parties respond? Joining us from Miami, Jadan Horyn is a political commentator and editor-in-chief of Soigné. Here in Washington, D.C., Rina Shah is the founder of Rilax Strategies and a former Republican strategist. Becker is the executive director of the Answer Coalition, and Douglas Sloan is principal at the National Capital Strategy Group. And Douglas, why don't I start with you on this aid package? Biden, as I mentioned, wants over $100 billion in aid. It's going to go for Israel, Ukraine, border security. Secretary of State Blinken was up on the Hill testifying before the Senate, asking for this aid, but the Speaker has a different idea altogether. How do you see this shaking out?
Well, the interesting thing about the aid package to Israel and Republican support to Israel is that it's been pretty steadfast among Republicans that have been polled over the past few years and has only grown since the Hamas attacks. So I can't imagine that the Speaker is going to interrupt an aid package to Israel when they have such strong support among Republican voters for Israel among American citizens. And of course, you know, this is all leading up to a presidential election. Of course, Congress is going to be up. He's going to be up. All the Republicans are going to be up in Congress. Now, I just don't see him trying to interrupt the support when every poll, virtually every poll, has shown that Republicans remain steadfast in even growing support for Israel and their family and friends and comrades in Israel. So I can't imagine that they're going to interrupt that for any other issues that may pop up.
Jadan, the new House Speaker says, look, I want $14.3 billion just to go to Israel. I don't want Israel, Ukraine, border security all lumped together. And now there are some Democrats and Republicans, a bipartisan group that said, hey, let the big package at least come forward for a vote. And we're also hearing from other Republicans, the Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, chiming in his support for the larger package. Let's listen to what he had to say.
So at the risk of repeating myself, the threats facing America and our allies are serious and they're intertwined. If we ignore that fact, we do so at our own peril.
So there's McConnell. He's not alone. Susan Collins from Maine and Lindsey Graham from South Carolina also saying they'd like to see this as a package piece of legislation. Can you talk to us about the divisions within the Republican Party, what we see in the House and in the Senate?
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that most emblematic of really the rise of the kind of Trumpist wing that took over the House and the more traditional Republicans, maybe the neocons, et cetera, that exist in the Senate. The Senate obviously is filled with individuals who they're looking far more at our alliances, our long-term strategic partners and allies. And the House is looking at the immediate, the short-term needs. And I would argue that while they are great and there's a large divide philosophically between the two sides in this approach, this is really more about immediacy of need. I would argue that Speaker Johnson is saying that there's an immediacy of need for Israel, and we understand, and there's an argument to be made for what additionally can be done for Ukraine, but we have given them and continue to give them a large amount of resources, both in capital and arms, and the other aspects of the aid package, whether it be the southern border or theoretically for Taiwan, those are less of the immediate need. And so Yes, I think we can speak greatly to the divide that exists between the House and the Senate in terms of philosophy, but I think this is more of actual practical implications and implementation.
Rina, let's talk a little bit about what Jadan was just talking about, the Trumpist wing of the Republican Party, because this bill that Johnson's advocating seems to kind of move in their direction. Let's just do a standalone bill for Israel, but let's also cut funding for the IRS, which, you know, he has a kind of a Trumpist wing in his party that brought down Kevin McCarthy from that post. And Johnson sort of has to kind of pivot in their direction to keep them happy because, you know, it doesn't take very many votes to lose that job. And we saw what happened, gridlock for about 22 days. Give me your sense of what we're seeing in the House now and how this is playing out.
Speaker Johnson has to sort of kowtow to that Trumpist faction of the House because he is part of them. Let's not forget who this speaker is. He is an evangelical Christian who does not apologize for his views that are opposed to same-sex marriage. He is also vehemently anti-abortion. This is a very right-wing speaker we are seeing who has come to power simply because his colleagues were exhausted. Now, look, he's entrusted to now do right by the entire body of Congress, the American people who really are looking at this speaker for leadership. In this moment, the standalone option for giving aid to Israel is probably the best thing he can do to kind of have his cake and eat it too. But there was no choice he had because as an evangelical Christian, this is what he believes, that you must have Israel's back at every point and every turn. But you look at public opinion now in the United States, there's a reason the Congress is divided on supporting Israel. And let me put it this way. What we see now is a sentiment that is sort of coming up to the surface and bubbling up, which I think is very much going to continue to grow. It's a sentiment that you can be pro-Israel, but you can be anti-Benjamin Netanyahu, Bibi, as he's affectionately known. I think this is obviously Bibi's greatest challenge. There are people in Israel who feel that Bibi will pay for what happened on October 7th. It is a great tragedy what has happened to all the innocents who've lost their lives across the board. Hamas is a terrorist organization. And so what I see from Republican leaders in Congress and also Democrats is saying, let's do this right now because Hamas needs to be dealt with and Israel needs to deliver that blow to Hamas. And this is what's needed for America to step up and have the back of Israel, because again, this is about extinguishing Hamas, extinguishing that terror threat, and about nothing more. But again, this is a very tough hill because you see public opinion now here within these United States is saying, look, what are we doing sending billions of dollars of aid abroad? We need it here within our borders.
And Brian, let's talk about that. I mean, there are some here in America who don't much have an appetite, as Rina was just saying. Hey, why do we keep sending money overseas for 2 wars when we've got all kinds of problems here in the United States? How do you see it playing out in the political cycle that's just about ready to really kick off?
Well, I would say that this is the majority sentiment. It's not just a sentiment. I think it's the majority sentiment. I think if anybody went around the country and did an honest survey of how American people feel about spending another $106 billion for war in Ukraine, war against the people of Gaza, a potential war with China over Taiwan, which the U.S. formally recognizes as part of China. I think the American people are actually very fed up with this kind of sort of proclivity towards endless war. I mean, it has been 2 decades of endless war. They're always fought for a noble cause, correct? They're always for something wonderful. They're always to fight terrorism or to stop weapons of mass destruction or to protect civilians. But they leave in their wake all of this death and destruction and suffering and instability, which leads to more war, more conflict. And the American people, frankly, don't understand why the U.S. government should be so committed to a policy of endless war. Right now, as we speak, 70,000 child care centers are slated to go bankrupt because COVID relief funding that was made ample in 2020 and kept those child care centers afloat, that funding is ending. The U.S. Congress says, oh, we don't have money for 70,000 child care centers. 3.2 million children are about to lose child care. That's 3.2 million families. But you can spend money, $106 billion for more war. The American people don't like it. That's why Congress's approval rating is in the single digits. And that's why President Biden's approval rating is going down, down, and further down.
Douglas, let me ask you about that. Do you sense that there is going to be a backlash at the polls, just from what Brian was talking about?
Well, that depends on how quickly they can wrap this situation in Israel and Ukraine up. American voters notoriously have very short memories. We're just coming into November now, so we're looking at a full year before voters go to the polls in next year's presidential and congressional elections and statewide elections as well. So it just depends on how soon these wars, these military conflicts get wrapped up in Ukraine and Israel. I would like to dovetail on the last speaker's comment. It's just not war where we're sending billions of dollars overseas. The United States sends $3 billion to Israel every year. And that has been a long-standing policy with the United States. One year, they sent billions of dollars to Israel, and the city of Detroit went bankrupt and couldn't keep the lights on. So, yeah, that causes a lot of Americans to take note and pause and ask, what is going on? We need money here. We have homeless people here. We have people that are hungry here. We have substandard education. We have all these problems that were left over from COVID, and we should try to focus on helping American citizens first and foremost, not ignoring the fact that, yes, we obviously want to stand with our allies in Israel and we want to stand against terrorism. But when it comes down to it, we do have a lot of problems that we need to address in the homeland.
Douglas, we're talking a little bit about the 2024 presidential election. As you say, it's over a year away, but it seems like it's coming like a freight train aimed at us. We're seeing so much political coverage. You know, President Biden wanted to shake up the nominating process and decided that, you know, South Carolina was more representative of the United States versus Iowa and New Hampshire, and so he wanted that to be the first state to go. New Hampshire doesn't want any part of this. They still want to have a primary election. And now this week we saw a challenger, a House member, Dean Phillips. Most people don't know who he is. He's from Minnesota, but he went to New Hampshire. He signed his declaration of candidacy. He says he's going to hold a lot of town hall meetings there. And now there's been reporting in the New York Times and elsewhere saying, you know, maybe this is a Biden blunder about New Hampshire. How do you see this thing playing out?
I am fully confident that we'll have all this craziness wrapped up before the primaries happen next year. I totally understand where Biden is coming from in terms of having a state that's more representative of the party to kick off the presidential elections instead of New Hampshire and Iowa that are lily white and really don't represent the Democratic Party. So I understand where he's coming from with that. Regarding the guy that's going to be that wants to run against him, he's not even going to make the ballot in most states. He missed his opportunity there. For you have to do different things to gain ballot access in these states for next year's primaries and caucuses early on. So this challenger won't even be on the ballot in most states. So yeah, maybe he makes some noise in New Hampshire, but there are 50 states in this country, and they all have a say-so in the presidential election, and you need to come up with a significant electoral value in each state. So I don't imagine that that's going to be much of a challenge to Joe Biden, and I am confident that the DNC is going to get all this meted out and sorted out before next year's elections.
Jadan, let's talk about Biden and something that a lot of people were talking about, which is his age. He's 80 years old, and Trump has actually brought it up on stage, talking about basically that Biden's kind of a doddering old man. But Trump himself is starting to face questions about his age. Of course, you heard this story this weekend in Sioux City. He called it Sioux Falls. Sioux Falls is in South Dakota. Sioux City is in Iowa. You could hear grumbling from the crowd in Sioux City. They weren't very happy about it. He's claimed that he beat Barack Obama, which of course he ran against Hillary Clinton. He said Viktor Orban is the head of Turkey when he's actually the head of Hungary. The list kind of goes on and on. He's 77. He's 3 years younger than Biden. But I'm wondering, about mental faculties and aging, if that's going to be a big part of this campaign, because Nikki Haley on the Republican side said that there should be mental competency tests for candidates over the age of 75, obviously in reference to the challenge that she's presenting to Trump as well as Biden. I want to get your thoughts on that.
Oh, yeah, and then I think the challenge that we have with our Senate Majority Leader, the challenge that we had with former Senator Feinstein, the challenge that was presented with Nancy Pelosi, the octogenarians that are running our country have a grip, an iron grip on power. I think it is legitimate for voters to assess the mental faculties of their commander-in-chief, someone who has to make precise and really thoughtful deliberations and decisions. And I think it should be one that all voters consider, regardless of whether they're Republican, Democrat, or Independent. And there is a good possibility that it will become a major component of this race, though it's hard for it to show up in polling because there are other issues that voters care about that are much more immediate. You know, the issue of immigration and inflation, the two I's, they're on voters' minds at all times. But on the back burner always is a discussion about the mental acuity, the mental clarity, and whether or not our two potential front runners are actually going to be able to serve out their term as president. And frankly, it's going to come up more and more for voters as a priority, but I don't see it ever leading because people are just going to care about the things that immediately come to mind.
And Jadan, let me ask you a follow-up on that, because you talked about the Trumpist wing of the Republican Party, and it seems like the challengers who are taking on Trump kind of want to hit him with kid gloves. Because they don't want to kind of alienate the Trumpist wing, the MAGA crowd, so to speak. Is this an area where Nikki Haley can actually present, like, maybe we shouldn't go with Trump because of his age, that sort of thing, where she might be able to make some inroads?
I think, you know, really where she can make inroads is to show that she is the future, but also, you know, as Biden is slipping due to foreign policy blunders, we are reminded of the Trump years and of kind of the world of a much more calm time. And she is obviously a benefactor of that bit of nostalgia. She's up by 10 points in Iowa. It is no coincidence that it overlaps with the outbreak of war in the Middle East and the ongoing war in Eastern Europe, the potential for war in East Asia. I think it harkens back to the better style during the Trump years, and some voters are determining that she was that guiding hand. And frankly, if she leans into that and says the chaos and dysfunction of the administration under Trump will be done again, and with the grave dangers to America and its allies, I will give the steady hand and provide the steady hand that Trump would otherwise be able to, but is going to be completely beset by his vendetta and kind of revenge that he is planning.
Rina, I want to get your thoughts on Nikki Haley as well, because there's been two kind of major developments in the Republican field. Of course, Mike Pence, the former vice president, dropping out, and then Nikki Haley kind of showing this kind of surge. As Jadan pointed out, in Iowa, she's second in the most recent polling, tied with Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida. But in New Hampshire, she's ahead of DeSantis in second. South Carolina poll just came out from CNN today. Of course, that's her home state, but she's got 22% there. It appears she's surging. How do you see the field right now?
When the GOP primary field sort of started to take shape, I think there was a great sentiment out there that has almost been extinguished, all but extinguished. I would say it was that Governor DeSantis of Florida was the one to beat. And now you see this former governor of South Carolina, a woman who served in Trump's administration, of course, as UN ambassador, but then came out and criticized him. I think she is somebody to look at because she is not only palatable for what she has said in the past couple of debates, but also for what she stands for. Coming from the South, being a daughter of immigrants, criticizing Trump, yet being able to do it in a way that seems kind and gentle and not too brash. These are all sort of tick marks in the pro column for Nikki Haley. Now, if you look at her on space. You see a candidate that is going back to her roots of being an accountant. She served in the South Carolina legislature. It's no surprise to me that she talks about the economy in the way she does. She has been very sort of almost forceful in her critique of Bidenomics. And that's what this moment calls for. It calls for somebody to look at this administration and say, you say you're effective, but how effective will you be? Jobs numbers are up, but how long will that be sustained? Consumer spending may be up, but people are doing that on credit cards. So eventually they're going to have to pay. And let's not forget the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell, has said that he is not opposed to raising rates again in order to cool inflation. So all that could really hurt this current president and make it tough for him to win re-election. And that is what I think his challenger, Dean Phillips, has come out recognizing and saying that, sure, Biden has been effective, but he's too old and he's too far down in the polls from Trump in order to be the candidate who is able to win the White House again and re-enter it in 2025. So I think there's that entryway. Again, the field is not yet narrowed down to 3 or 4, for example. We've still got Burgum. We've still got Christie. They've got to leave the stage. Let's not forget Senator Tim Scott. He's also got to make an exit. And then there's Vivek Ramaswamy and Ron DeSantis. So Nikki Haley, though she's performed well, I do think America is still very much a misogynistic country. We've got people who don't want to see a woman as president as yet. And when we look at what's possible for Nikki Haley, I think still she can potentially make it, but it is a tougher climb for her. I do see her continuing the messages on abortion and the economy, which are both going to be on the ballot in 2024, a year out from now. But again, it is a tough uphill climb for her, no matter how well she performs in this next debate.
Brian, Rina brings up Ron DeSantis. He was the heavy favorite among the money folks. I mean, when he announced his bid in May, he raised more than $20 million in his first 6 weeks, still picking up millions here and there. What happened with his campaign, do you think?
Well, DeSantis is a lousy candidate. He was basically created by the media, but when people actually get to hear him, talk to him, see how he actually functions, see how he deals with criticism, it's not a pretty picture, actually. More than that, his policies in Florida have been pretty disastrous for big parts of the population. Not if you're affluent, not if you are part of maybe the top 20% in Florida. You're probably doing quite well under Ron DeSantis, but his war against teaching the true history of America, his war against the gay community. I mean, you can't sort of stereotype and caricature big parts of the population as if all Republican voters are hate gay people, for instance, or don't want to support gay rights, and all of the things that are the big talking points for ultra-right candidates like DeSantis. They're actually not very popular. They don't speak to most people. So again, DeSantis, we see this in electoral cycle after electoral cycle. Remember in 2016, Jeb Bush was going to be the guy. And then Jeb Bush was basically a big flop. The fact is, none of the candidates in the Republican Party are very appealing to people. And the same is true, of course, for the Democrats, where all of the candidates have been scared off. I want to say this about Joe Biden and the Gaza war. According to a very important survey among Arab American voters, and the Arab American voters are important in Michigan, Minnesota, and Virginia, swing states really, Biden's popularity or approval rating has gone down 17 points since October 7th. 200,000 Arab American voters in Michigan. When you look at these numbers and you think about how bad Biden looks, the fact that he can't put a single sentence together, the fact that he can hardly walk off the stage and know where he's going, the fact that he's committed to a neocon pro-war policy, when you put all of that together and then sort of think the priority of American people is to spend $106 billion for more endless war, I mean, this is a recipe for disaster for the Democrats. The question for the Republicans is, what are they going to do about Donald Trump? He's facing 4 criminal trials. There's nobody else who can openly compete against him because he still has a huge base inside the Republican Party. And neither side, neither Trump or Biden, will engage in debates. So we have a dysfunctional political system. And I think right now everything is up for grabs. Luckily for Biden, the economy hasn't completely crashed. But if it dips even a little bit more, I think Biden is toast. The question for the Republicans is, can they get along without Donald Trump? It doesn't, at the moment, appear so.
Douglas, I want to get your sense, first of all, what he just had to say, and then also add into that equation, this kind of cauldron that he just described. You've got Cornel West and Robert Kennedy Jr. also running as independents. How does all this shake out?
Yeah, well, I agree with the last speaker, a panelist, to an extent. He's right about Trump and the Republicans. It's amazing that the guy that is leading the Republican Party and leading in all the polls right now is under 4 separate indictments, some 90 some odd charges. He's not going to be able to get out of all that. He is going to be convicted by this time next year. So that is a big question about what exactly they're going to do and who exactly is going to lead the charge, and if they're even going to be able to make the ballot on and be the nominee in some of these states. So the Republicans really have an incredibly interesting conundrum that they have to deal with. As far as the Democrats are concerned, yes, Joe Biden is old. Yes, you know, some Democrats disagree with some of his policies in terms of sending all this money to Ukraine and Israel, as I mentioned earlier. However, the economy has rebounded since COVID. The economy is moving in the right direction. We are seeing more jobs. There are more jobs available. More people are employed. They're pumping money into the economy. So we are seeing a rebound in that regard. And, you know, what can I say? He's our guy moving forward. I don't see the independents making any type of movement or any type of headway in the general election. And we will be looking at another Biden presidency in 2024, because inevitably, even if somehow, some way Trump does make it to the general election, he still has to gain more independents and moderate Democrats to his side to vote for him. And that's not going to happen. He isn't gaining any additional independents or moderate Democrats to support him. So a Trump presidency is a no-brainer. It's not going to happen. So we're looking at Joe Biden, and we're going to ride with Joe until the wheels fall off.
It's nice to see the cat in the background on October 31st. Rina, let me close out with a quick question to you. We started by talking about the new speaker. Obviously, the government shutdown kind of led to him landing in this spot, and that clock is ticking again. Are we going to have a government shutdown? Will he be able to avert it?
Anyone's guess, because look, how he's come to this post is, again, like I mentioned earlier, from a place of exhaustion. His colleagues not thinking that this was even possible to get to somebody that was lesser known, who only came to Congress in 2016. It's a moment in which you have to wonder, does he even understand how to pull the levers in order to get the House to where it needs to get in order to avert that type of shutdown? So here we sit in a moment of great uncertainty, and I think it really epitomizes how the year we've had. We have no clue what's coming.
I agree with you. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you all so much. I'm Mike Walter in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for watching another edition of The Heat.